Hi, my name's Andi Meyer. The kind of work that I do is in the theater. I'm a theater artist. I've been a career actor, but in the last 5 years or so, I've been transitioning over into producing and directing. People always ask me, where are you from? And to Asian Americans, it's kind of a loaded question. So from sort of Kansas City. I've been here since the early 90s. Grew up in the Midwest, but I'm from Hawaii. I was born in Hawaii, and my ethnic background is I'm Japanese Okinawan, fourth generation, and Hawaiian, Native Hawaiian Islander. Currently, I am producing and also directing a project called Representation Matters / Changing the Narrative, and it is a collection of 90-second plus works by writers of color addressing those two prompts. What does Representation Matters mean? Growing up as a Native Hawaiian Islander and Asian American, in film and media, the arts, there was almost zero reflection of me, who I am, who my family is, in any of that. So it was kind of like growing up, looking into the mirror and seeing no reflection, or seeing a very distorted reflection of yourself. And as I've grown older and realized that, you're not going to be cast in every particular role, and, we shouldn't be, but there's just not enough space right now. I should say there's just not enough representation for people of color. And watching my children grow up also without a reference point for themselves, it's become really important to me to do everything that I can to create that and to help to carve out that space. Even though America's billed as a melting pot, what that in essence means is that you have to be the default, which is definitely not a person of color. You have to be white, and if you're not white, then you don't fit the default, and you don't fit what might be seen as the romantic lead, the leading character. And the roles that I've gotten have a lot of the times been pretty stereotypical. Not many three-dimensional representations unless they've come out of our own community, our own arts community. How does my background and identity affect what I create as an artist? Now it affects it tremendously. I didn't think that it did, because I think, when we go to an arts event, we have this willing suspension of disbelief. And as an audience member, we engage as if we are part of this story. And I'm actually not considered a part of this story, as I found out. And so that's where the drive comes from to create my own work. So my personal background, what I've lived, is that there's a lot more to people of color than we are allowed space for in any mainstream art scene, unless it's set apart. If there's plenty of arts that go on in people's separate communities, but you wouldn't necessarily know that from looking at the landscape of Kansas City. Like, you could hardly believe that there are basically 2 African American theater companies that have been really up on their feet, and then Jackie Gafford, who's been just an arts warrior for 20 years. You wouldn't think that in the 4th most cultured city in the United States that that's all there was, right? Up until a couple years ago. Now there's a couple of us who are trying to make some progress. As an actor, without the kind of work that I felt really allows me the opportunities to create the kind of work that I see all of my white colleagues getting to create and having the kind of artistic community that I see everybody around me getting to engage in was missing. And I just came to the realization that if I didn't do it, then it wasn't going to happen. And, it makes a difference who's telling your story. If somebody else writes your story and tells it about you, it's one perspective. But if you write your own story, or if your stories are from your community, it gives it a completely different voice. And that, of course, the playwright makes a difference, the producing makes a difference, the directing makes a difference. It all makes a very big difference. Funders, yeah. I've experienced a lot of invisibility on the Kansas City scene. There are a ton of Asian Americans here in Kansas City. I'm a part of the Mayor's Commission on Ethnic Enrichment, and there's so many Asian American organizations, and they're working within their own communities, but you don't see that represented as a part of the Kansas City art scene, really. Like, you might be invited to go over here to this festival or go over there to this festival, but it's not really embraced as a part of the Kansas City, Missouri, United States of America art scene. Well, in terms of obstacles that I experience and that I know are issues across the country are things like access to space. Funding is huge. There was a study done a couple years ago that showed that the only arts organization of color across the country that is able to compete against other benchmark arts organizations, like, for instance, the Kansas City Repertory Theater, on that funding level, the only one over $5 million was Alvin Ailey, New York. One in the entire country. And so it's funding trends, it's lack of, I think, understanding in the funding community about the needs of artists and arts organizations of color, because we function differently. How do we as arts organizations and artists of color function differently? We don't have the arts organizations that are able to really sustain us and pay us a living wage. We don't have space that we always have access to without being paid a living wage. We are doing it in our spare time. We are having to hold down other jobs, full-time jobs, and support our families. We don't have those organizations that we can get hired at, We don't have those organizations that support our work. And so we're meeting oftentimes around very flexible schedules. We're meeting with children. We are having to meet with food. A lot of meetings and a lot of rehearsals happen with food there, so that if you're missing your dinner time or you can't afford, then maybe somebody can, bring a few leftovers or something that, we can all eat and work and get some stuff done at the same time. It's altogether a different thing. I want to do as much as I can to create the kind of representation for my children, for other Asian Americans and Native Hawaiians out in the world that I don't have. I would love to work towards sustainable arts organizations for people of color. I would love to work towards a more equitable artistic landscape, locally and nationally.